Welcome to this video on the Imbued Creeds from the tabletop role-playing game Hunter: The Reckoning. The Imbued, or Hunters, are one of two game lines produced in the aftermath of the Sixth Great Maelstrom and the Time of Reckoning. Mortals who were exposed to the supernatural and granted the power to fight against it. The creeds of Hunters are based on three virtues: Zeal, Mercy, and Vengeance, which determine how a hunter views the hunt and the abilities they possess. But without further ado, the creeds. Avengers. Hunters who walk the path of vengeance are straightforward. They see monsters, they kill monsters, rinse and repeat until monsters cease to exist. However, Avengers are not sadists. When they hunt, death comes quickly to their prey. Interrogation or torture are wasted time that could be better used preparing for the next hunt. Avengers are chosen from those who had a strong sense of right and wrong before they were called, even if they didn't always act on it. Avengers also have a sense of proportionality, most of the time. While all Avengers believe in some form of justice, it is not the same kind of justice. Avengers tend to have, let's say, strong beliefs, and not just about the hunt. This touches on the other end of those who follow the creed of vengeance. They are strong-willed, possibly a little hard-headed, and also extreme, and usually were that way before being imbued. Avengers who are unable to remain objective find themselves hunting alone, or sticking to like-minded hunters. Avengers' single-mindedness tends to get them in trouble eventually. Some Avengers who were already pretty out there before receiving the call are already on some government shit list before they realize the flesh-eating, blood-drinking, mind-twisting monsters are also inside of the government, and that they fit in pretty well with the alleged humans. And it gets hard to move around freely when some federal investigator takes a personal interest in your hunting activities. But then there are those Avengers who hear the call and decide to wed their prior politics to the hunt, resulting in various religious, political, and ethnic groups becoming more dangerous as they have one or more imbued fanatics in their ranks who might not be all that broken up about collateral damage done to outsiders if it nets them one more dead monster. In some cases, it might not matter if they are monsters or not. The extremist Avenger might decide that they will also avenge their ideology, their faith, or their race in between hunts. And then there are those Avengers who go completely the other way. The hunt becomes an all-consuming obsession. They abandon jobs, families, and go after the monsters with everything they have. They become vengeance itself, detached from morality or empathy. And when you're obsessed, it's pretty easy to lose perspective. And when you lose perspective, the calculus of the hunt can become pretty horrific. The edges of vengeance focus primarily on tracking and combat. Avengers can convert, or at high levels manifest, extremely effective weapons for use against the enemy, to locate the enemy by marking them, conceal themselves from the senses of others, and enhance their physical abilities. Defenders. Offense might get the glory, but defense wins the game. Hunters who follow the creed of defense stand between the things that go bump in the night and ordinary humans. There is no point in fighting a war if you have nothing to go back to. Where the monsters came from doesn't matter. Why they exist doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is that the monsters are coming to kill the people that the hunter cares about. That alone is reason enough to destroy them. Defenders take up the creed because they believe they are the best ones for the job. They aren't interested in chasing the enemy to the dark corners of the earth, or rooting out the ancient abominations whose dreams guide armies of the dead and the damned. Protect your own, even if that occasionally means protecting your people from themselves. Defenders tend to be very cautious hunters, who will do everything they can think of to not only succeed in a hunt, but bring everyone back alive. They have a hard time with the idea of acceptable losses. Yet when defenders must fight, they are as ferocious as an Avenger, and as prepared to sacrifice as a martyr. Isolation is an easy trap for defenders to fall into. Most defenders become adept at fortifying their domiciles against uninvited visitors, and hovering over those they care about. Defenders who were loners before receiving the call direct their protective instincts towards other hunters, which is not a bad thing in itself, but it can lead to restraint when force is called for. resulting in avoidable casualties as the enemy decides to kill one last human out of spite. These deaths weigh heavily on defenders more than other hunters. Then there are the true oddballs of defenders whose desire to protect transfers to those that the imbued hunt, usually because they had some relationship with the monster before receiving the call. More typical is a defender who suffers from some form of misplaced sympathies and ambivalence, a refusal to bear the burden of passing judgment on another, instead advocating for peaceful separation between the imbued and the enemy. This rarely works out. The edge of defense turns the imbued into a supernaturally deadly and wary guardian of places and people. Defense can warn a hunter that danger is lurking near his wards, to patch himself up enough to keep fighting, and to force monsters to focus their attention on fighting the defender, and to turn their own bodies into hazards for those who dare to touch or fight them. Judges. Hunters, like many people, misunderstand the word judgment. Judgment has less to do with ponderous legal text or men in expensive suits and black robes who made the terrible decision to attend law school. Judgment, at its root, is about discernment, examination, the ability to see beyond the surface to the core of an issue or matter, and decide what should be done. Hunters who follow the creed of judgment are called to see the enemy as they truly are, beyond any human guise they might use to conceal themselves, and pronounce what is best to be done with them. Monsters are very good at mimicking humans, which causes other hunters to hesitate, leading to yet more death, or killing monsters who might have better served the cause as sources of information, or possibly even as allies. Judges make hard choices, considering the practical matters that determine the success or failure of a hunt. What weapons are best? Where is the best place to confront the monster? When is the best time to do so? Can a monster be saved, exorcised, redeemed, or is destruction the only option? But once the decision is made, it is carried out to its end, one way or another. Many judges, before they received the call, were decision makers, particularly involving the lives of others. Some judges have compared their creed to being the one-eyed king in the land of the blind. But as far as most of them are concerned, there are too many unknown factors in simply exposing the enemy. For one, there are many mortals who serve the enemy, both knowingly and unknowingly. It is the knowing pawns of the enemy that keep judges awake. While judging monsters is difficult, what might the hunt turn into if the imbued expanded their focus to include mortals? How would the friends and family of the enemy's dupes react to their demise for conspiring with the enemy? How many more enemies would the imbued make among those who can not only not see, but not understand why their mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, sons, and daughters were deemed worthy of death? But what judges hate more than any other task is having to sit in judgment of their fellow imbued who have gone too far afield. The imbued may be a recent phenomenon, but it has not taken some hunters long to exercise their abilities to questionable or even outright evil ends. Someone has to stop them. Since the judge is already making hard choices, what's one more? But at some point, every judge faces a moment of indecision, and at that moment, things tend to break down, as other hunters toss in their 2 cents. Paralysis in decision-making results in danger and poor decisions by others, and also the attention of the government, or worse, the enemy. If you do not decide, someone else will decide for you, and usually not in your interests. On the other side of paralysis are the judges with God complexes. These judges are convinced that they, and they alone, know the proper way to hunt and judge monsters, and are perfectly willing to do the thinking for other hunters, whether they like it or not. The edge of judgment gives an imbued perception and authority. Judges are supernaturally aware of the truth, and as such can see through lies, whether spoken, or some illusion created by monsters used to hide themselves. Judges can also exert power over monsters to bind them in place, so that they may be examined, and if need be, destroyed. Innocence. The creed of innocence is the first of those associated with the virtue of mercy, and it shows through. Innocents approach the hunt not with righteous fury or grim determination, but with openness and curiosity. Of all the creeds, the innocents are the ones most willing to entertain the possibility that some monsters may be people. Innocents bring their humanity to the hunt, for better or worse, and do what they can to protect the humanity of their fellow hunters, even if it means those hunters hate them for it today. Later on, they might realize that those small sins done in the name of the hunt tend to add up. A pebble can quickly turn into an avalanche. The innocent hunters do what they can to help. This might mean catching a monster to try and rehabilitate it. Other times, this might mean dumping a magazine of live rounds in its face until it stops twitching, thereby helping the world as a whole. They regard the innocence of others as more important than their own, and will take on the burdens of unpleasant tasks in order to spare others from having to live with doing things they might regret. The main contributions innocents make to the hunt is forcing their fellow hunters to stop and think, to consider the human angle. The curious thing about innocents is that, after they've exhausted all other possibilities, they are largely untroubled by guilt when the time comes for getting dirt on their hands. Or rather, they cannot allow themselves to be weighed down by guilt, because they may not be able to get back up from it again. Some innocents have taken to calling this state of persistent melancholy the hunter's blues. The blues have caused more than a few innocents to stop hunting altogether. Then there are the innocents who try to put on a front, usually for their fellow hunters. They try to be an Avenger light until they forget their innocence altogether. The edge of innocence is about protection, and the powers associated with it make an innocent more difficult for monsters to attack, whether that means hiding the innocent from an enemy's sight or by making it difficult for an enemy to attack them head-on. Martyrs. If the apocalypse and the forces of hell could be turned back at the cost of a single life, specifically your own, would you pay that price? If your answer is yes, then you are a candidate for the creed of martyrdom. The martyrs will give up everything for the hunt and for humanity, right down to their very souls. Some martyrs are the way they are because they feel the need to atone for their past sins. Others believe that salvation awaits them at the end of sacrifice. Others still believe that they are the only ones fit to put themselves between hell and humanity. In an unusual way, martyrdom gives those who follow it more fulfillment and purpose than they had before being called to the hunt. They know how they end, death in service to the cause, and they find peace in it. Oh, martyrs can, and often do, complain about how they are put upon and burdened and misunderstood, but as soon as they are done pissing and moaning, they are the first ones volunteering for the next scouting mission into enemy territory. Because given the stakes, if one person can make a difference, it may as well be you. Martyrs suffer. Some downright enjoy it. Maybe not in an erotic way, but because they know that no one else can endure what they can. This taste for suffering in the name of the greater good can get self-destructive, and even be detrimental to other hunters if allowed to go too far. Martyrs forget that the rough parts of life are like that flight attendant presentation before you take off. Secure your own mask first, then assist the child. Otherwise, both of you might die. Likewise, make sure that you are physically and mentally fit to hunt. Otherwise, you and your crew might not come back alive because you fucked up. Then there are the martyrs who are downright suicidal, whether through guilt or nihilism. While shoving a pipe bomb down your pants and charging the nearest bloodsucker might certainly be a glorious end, in a charge of the light brigade kind of way, it might not be the best for the cause. For certain monsters, a suicide bomber might be categorized as an inconvenience at best. The edge of martyrdom deals with suffering and sacrifice. A martyr can push themselves to superhuman levels of strength at the cost of their lives, cause monsters to suffer from pain and decay, give their strength freely to others, and even strip monsters of their unholy power. Redeemers. The world is sick. The problem with injuries and sickness in the middle of a war is the choice of who to save and who to let die. The creed of redemption is about healing more than destruction, though some redeemers consider amputation, both literally and metaphorically, to be part of their mission. The afflicted, as redeemers refer to the enemy, may look, talk, and even behave like humans, but they most assuredly are not. Some monsters are physically sick to the point of lacking any signs of life, yet they still move. Others are mentally sick, so convinced that they possess powers of their own that they can bring them into existence. And some are a combination of both. Redeemers are about giving the afflicted a chance of survival, however undeserved or improbable it might be. But when the chance of recovery is slim to none, the more merciful choice is to end the afflicted's suffering, whether they want it or not. Redeemers who blend the biological with the metaphysical believe that the call is not new. These hunters suggest that the imbued are nothing less than a kind of collective, spiritual immune system of the entire human race that is activated now that the survival of the species is at stake. As proof of this, they point to ancient monster-slaying heroes, seemingly blessed with divine power at critical points in human history. If the afflicted are a virus, why wouldn't there be some means of countering it? It's no more absurd than immortal bloodsuckers, shapeshifters, or the walking dead. Most Redeemers prefer to focus on the practical use of their abilities, specifically in keeping their fellow hunters alive. When Redeemers aren't patching up other imbued, they are doing their part to put down the afflicted. Redeemers may want to save humans and the afflicted alike, but when a dog goes rabid, the kindest thing you can do for it is to put a bullet in its head. The afflicted are no different. It's a kindness that Redeemers hope will be extended to them if they ever succumb to the affliction. However, it's easy for Redeemers to fall prey to messianic delusions, given their suite of abilities. Some who are religious might see themselves as the embodiments of divine power, or even as divine beings in their own right, modern-day demigods awakened to their birthright. Other Redeemers might simply adopt the trappings of faith to amass followers and riches for themselves. This leads to the second group of problem Redeemers. Some things money can't buy. For everything else, there's Master. Wait, they haven't given me any sponsorships, I'm not name-dropping them. On the topic of sponsorship, however, there are plenty of wealthy people in the world with more money than health, who will gladly finance the imbued's mission in exchange for the Redeemer's healing hands. More avaricious Redeemers are tempted away from the mission by the material comforts that money can buy. But as other hunters will try to remind their wayward brethren, money is the means of the hunt, not its end. Then there are the Redeemers who get God complexes. They decide who lives, who dies, and they will not be questioned on it. When Redeemers get like this, it's best to cut bait and send them on their way, or relocate yourself. The edge of redemption focuses on saving the lives of mortals and suppressing the abilities of supernaturals. Redeemers can literally breathe life into injured humans. Conversely, Redeemers can deflect the physical and mystical attacks of monsters, force them to confront their lost or abandoned humanity, suppress their unnatural anger, or cut them off from the alternate planes and the power they derive from those places. Visionaries. What is the hunt? Has it happened before? Have the imbued appeared in history before? Are the imbued and the enemy being played against each other by forces greater than humanity can fathom? These are some of the questions that bedevil those who follow the creed of vision. Visionaries bring perspective to the hunt, the larger picture as it were. Visionaries seek to understand not only the hunt, but the enemy, and the imbued as well. Judges deal in immediate decisions that need to be made. Visionaries, on the other hand, take the long view. Other imbued think that the visionaries are slightly insane, and not without some cause. But visionaries bring a new angle to the hunt, which occasionally means synthesizing the various views of the creeds of imbued for the purpose of victory in not just a singular hunt, but in the hunt, and to bring final victory over the enemy. But then, what is victory? How should it be achieved? Is the hunt a contest between species, a primal struggle for the survival of one over the other, like the Cro-Magnons over the Neanderthals? Or is there another battlefield beyond the sight of the imbued? Visionaries are made restless by questions. Is the hunt a test sent by the messengers to assess our fitness as a species? Are the imbued meant to be their warriors, or their test subjects? Visionaries are plagued by questions about the hunt, questions which they also inflict on their fellow hunters, to prevent them from getting too lax or comfortable about the hunt. Visionaries like to think of themselves as the brains of the imbued, and to a lesser extent, their conscience, even more so than the innocents. while Visionaries are not the leaders of the imbued so much as they influence their fellow hunters, hopefully for the better. Ultimately, Visionaries gather information from their own visions, which they are compelled to share with their fellow imbued, even as they plague the imbued with questions that they would rather not ask or have answered. Visionaries try to translate their knowledge into operable intelligence. Some Visionaries have a narrow focus, a tunnel vision regarding the enemy and the hunt. Perhaps this is a view on what the enemy is and how their corruption spreads. Mutation, viruses, magic curses. These tunnel Visionaries have their pet theories and focus on them to the exclusion of larger matters. The important thing, as always, is to retain perspective. Visionaries also learn to rely on the visions and seek them out through the use of mind-altering substances. This can take Visionaries by the hand and lead them down the path of addiction rather than victory. Another group of Visionaries would rather not hunt at all, preferring to seek the truth of the imbued, the enemy, the messengers, rather than running here and there killing monsters. A few disillusioned hunters conclude that the hunt is a glorified gladiatorial contest between the enemy and the imbued, played out as a form of sport among beings that the imbued cannot comprehend. Other imbued regard such opinions as blasphemy, so a Visionary would be well advised to either keep their doubts to themselves or do so in a controlled environment. The edge of vision deals in insight and, to a lesser extent, wholeness. Hunters of vision can perceive future and past events, the weaknesses of the enemy, and even bend the world to restore themselves to a previous and ideal version. Hermits. Most imbued believe that there are only 7 creeds, and that the Visionaries are the only imbued who embody the virtue of vision. But they are wrong. There are 2 others, bringing the total number of creeds to 9. These are the broken creeds, the lost creeds. The first of these 2 are the unwilling followers of the creed of solitude, the Hermits. Hermits would rather not have their power. Most Hermits were communicators, and most importantly, listeners before the messengers subjected them to the call. Now the Hermits can do little more than listen. They hear the messengers' voices in their minds constantly, softly or loudly, clearly or chaotically. They are bombarded by sounds, sights, smells, and even tastes, crashing against the shores of their minds, enough to break lesser beings. Most Hermits quickly realize that the voices are worse around others, and worse still in the presence of the imbued and the enemy. Hermits want to unburden their minds to someone, mortals, or even other imbued. Yet they can rarely make sense of what the messengers shove into their heads, much less make sense of it for other imbued. It's easier and less painful for the Hermits to isolate themselves away from others, communicating their visions to other imbued, even if those visions don't always make sense, by some form of long-range communication. Hermits need time and space to try and interpret the information that the messengers inflict on them, if only for the sake of their own sanity. When a Hermit tries to force themselves into the world, the pain returns. The voices and visions come louder and brighter, until the Hermit feels like his mind is going to shatter under the assault. Some Hermits deal with this through a kind of aversion therapy. They acclimate themselves to the pain slowly, a single person, then 2, then 4, and so on, until the voices become at least tolerable, if never comfortable. But when it comes to other imbued, not even this works, so a Hermit's presence among their fellow hunters is brief at best. Other Hermits reject the mission, choosing to embrace hatred as a shield to pain, especially when it comes to the imbued, who seem to cause so much of it by their very presence. The trope of the bitter Hermit becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. The edge of solitude deals in perception and communication. Aside from hearing the voices of the messengers, Hermits can project their senses beyond their normal range, communicate with others at long distance, and serve as a conduit for the messengers. For monsters, this can be a devastating experience, but for bystanders who failed at their call the first time, a proclamation from a Hermit can give them a second chance to join the hunt and fight on the side of humanity. Waywards. The other lost creed of the virtue of vision is far more sinister than the Hermits and more brutal. The symbol of those who follow the creed of deviance suggests their purpose, that they were not imbued for a hunt, but for a war. The Waywards reject half measures in dealing with the enemy. There is one way to end the hunt, and only one: total destruction, either of the enemy or of the imbued, or of humanity as a whole. The enemy has no right to exist. The Waywards see them for what they truly are. They cannot help but see them for what they are. All imbued are gifted with the second sight, to see the enemy, but for Waywards, the second sight is an affliction. They cannot stop it. They cannot resist it. They see monsters around them all the time, unbidden, unrestrained. They are everywhere, horrifying, inhuman, and must be destroyed no matter the cost. The Waywards believe that they see the bigger picture, unlike the other imbued. They can pretend their insignificant little lives matter, that everything is still okay, that they can turn off the sight and make everything go back to normal. But families don't matter. The only thing that matters is victory in the Great War. The Waywards are prepared to burn down everything, just to ensure that the enemy doesn't get it. Some imbued who are aware of the Waywards argue whether they were insane before the call, or if it was being constantly exposed to monsters that drove them mad. Either way, Waywards are dangerous, both to themselves and others. They fear nothing and respect no laws or rules. They only acknowledge victory or defeat against the enemy. For their part, Waywards have no problem working with other imbued so long as they understand their place. If they don't, the Waywards have ways to make them see what they are fighting. To understand, as Waywards do, the only solution is complete destruction, regardless of the cost or collateral damage. Day to day, Waywards tend to keep their plans close to their chests. Ultimately, they don't trust their fellow imbued, as they can never be sure whether other imbued's resolve will falter, or worse, begin sympathizing with the enemy. That's when the Waywards consider disposing of them as well. Waywards are all in on the hunt, and no one can match them in dedication or obsession, but obsession can just as easily get a Wayward killed. New Waywards entertain delusions of strolling into a monster's lair guns blazing, killing all they find. Wiser Waywards who have survived a few hunts prefer to simply set fire to a monster's nest, killing all inside while watching from a safe distance. After all, the war, or the hunt, or whatever you want to call it, isn't about glory. It's about winning. But Waywards should be wary of falling too deeply in love with the perfect plan, as an abundance of caution for one monster can allow others to escape. Sometimes the perfect plan is less ideal than just kicking in the door and mowing down whoever you find, gun in each hand. But why put yourself at the front when there are other hunters there to do it for you? Ultimately, the Waywards consider themselves the most perceptive and therefore the most important warriors in the fight. Like in chess, if the king falls, the game is over. So a Wayward who lives to fight another day becomes an even more dangerous foe. The edge of deviance revolves around command and destruction. Wayward imbued can force others to see the enemy as they do, to perceive threats to themselves before they materialize, to drive other imbued into a mad, bloodthirsty fury, break the dead of their will, and focus their conviction into devastating power. And those were the 9 creeds of Hunter, the Reckoning. Hunter was a very interesting flavor in the world of darkness. The way I played Hunter in the past tended to vary between the detective thriller adventures in the vein of Seven and Fallen, or action horror like Evil Dead and From Dusk Till Dawn. Though I would be remiss in not pointing out that Hunter the Reckoning owes a debt to Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Hunter is ultimately a game of desperation, not just on the part of the humans who are called to the hunt, but of the beings who created them, which are revealed in my video on the history of the imbued. In the time of the Reckoning, the human race is effectively at the bottom of the 9th, 3 runs behind with 2 outs and no men on base. In other words, shit's fucked. So much so that the messengers are willing to hand reality-twisting powers to mortals in order to serve as the shock troops of the end times. And given the toll that the Hunters' own powers extract on their sanity, indicates that the imbued are not meant to survive long after the hunt. They will build no post-apocalyptic kingdoms, nor lead nations, nor birth demigod dynasties. Even if they win the war, the imbued will not, as the tagline suggests, inherit the earth, but the rest of humanity just might. Anyway, that's all I have for now. Until next time.